This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. While cleaning my room, I stumbled upon the old phone that Tony had locked away for 10 years. After unlocking it, I was surprised to see my sister as the wallpaper. In the notes, there was a heartfelt confession that brought me to tears, and the name of the female protagonist was also my sister's. Suddenly, I understood why the flowers that day were wilted, because they were secondhand. The moment I reached the end of the notes, my vision darkened and I found myself back at 18. Tony, wearing a blue and white school uniform, was planning his confession with his friends, nonchalantly saying, "Failure doesn't matter, there's always Hailey as a backup." Later, he approached me with the wilted flowers. After he finished his confession, I stepped back and publicly humiliated him. Even a dog wouldn't date you. I had found Tony's old phone from 10 years ago in the storage room. At that time, he forgot the password, and after multiple attempts, it got locked for 80,000 hours. It recorded many moments from our relationship. So, I specifically bought a wide charging cable. After cleaning up, the phone was fully charged. It showed that I could enter the password again in 4 hours. I lay down and scrolled through my phone. 4 hours later, I opened the old phone. And out of habit, I typed in my birthday. After the phone was locked, Tony set all the passwords to the same one. My birthday was also the day he confessed to me when I was 18. By the time I realized it, it was too late. The 6-digit code was already entered. Just when I thought the phone would lock again, feeling anxious and frustrated, it unlocked. The password was correct. What greeted my eyes was a photo of my sister. The screensaver was my sister. I sat up suddenly. There was an absurd feeling. The password was actually correct. So, he didn't forget the password. He intentionally locked the phone. I remembered that this phone had our intimate photos and sweet chat records. But at this moment, everything about me was empty. The album was filled with pictures of my sister, her back, her profile, when she went to practice dancing, when she went to the cafeteria. Many, messy. Tony and my sister's chat box was particularly intimate and ambiguous. Looking at the time, Tony and I were still together then. They recklessly discussed me, using all those ambiguous words. In the end, my sister said she had someone she liked and deleted Tony. The chat box turned into a wall of green text. Every word was filled with deep affection. The date coincided with the day Tony's phone was locked for 80,000 hours. So, it was because my sister had someone she liked and deleted him that he locked the phone himself. I suddenly remembered that my sister got divorced yesterday. It was also last night when Tony came back drunk, vomiting everywhere. So, I cleaned up today and found this phone in the storage room. It turned out Tony liked my sister, from high school to now. So what was I? A painful feeling gripped my chest, making it hard to breathe, and my whole body trembled. Inadvertently, I clicked on the notes app. The one pinned at the top was a draft of his confession. I clicked into it with trembling hands. Every word matched exactly with every sentence Tony said to confess to me back then. Oh no. There was something different. On the notes, the name he used to confess was Alice, and I was Hailey. I suddenly remembered that the flowers were wilted. The day Tony confessed to me, it turned out they were secondhand. These past 10 years have been one big lie. I felt like I was suffocating. And soon after, my vision went dark and I fainted. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in early winter when I was 17. The leaves were yellow, and the sound of studying filled the air. I hurried to the bathroom to wash my face and wake myself up, but I didn't realize in my rush that I had entered the boys' restroom. As luck would have it, someone came in at that moment. I had no choice but to hide in a stall, my heart pounding like a drum. Bro, are you really going to confess to the school beauty? There are so many people pursuing her. Then I heard that familiar voice. TSK, whether I confess or you do, why should I be scared? It was Tony. His nonchalant voice came through. Failure doesn't matter. There's always Hailey as a backup. His friend immediately laughed. Just like you. If you can't get the school beauty, you can go for her sister. But it's strange, though. Hailey and the school beauty are clearly twins. Yet one is in the sky and the other in the ground, like some genetic mutation. Tony scoffed. How can a country bumpkin compare with a city swan? I'm quite troubled by being liked by her, but she's obedient, very easy to handle. His tone was particularly self-satisfied. Writing homework, lining up for meals, buying drinks. They're all child's play. What I enjoy most is deliberately teasing her. The more I look at her, the more I talk to her, the more she blushes and stammers. It's so much fun. Tony laughed out loud, full of pride. To my ears, it was particularly grating. My hands were clenched into fists beside me. Only when their voices faded away did I come out of the stall. I kept my head down and ran back to class. The school bell rang just in time. Alice walked in through the door, sat next to me, and moved her chair a little as if avoiding a plague. I couldn't help but glance at her a few times. Alice and I were indeed like heaven and earth. When my mom gave birth to twins, she had limited energy, and my dad's finances were limited too. So, after discussing it with the family, they decided to raise Alice themselves, and I was sent to live with my grandparents. Thus, after a month, I was taken to the countryside by my grandparents. While Alice stayed in the city, I was fed formula and rice cereal in the countryside. Alice was breastfed and introduced to solid food in my mom's arms. I played in the mud every day when I was 3 or 4 years old, getting tanned. Alice had many princess dresses at 3 or 4 years old, delicate and fair-skinned. The contrast, along with who raised whom, made me always left behind in the countryside. My mom didn't like me. My grandma also said, "Your mom doesn't want you anymore." It wasn't until high school, when I was about to face the important life milestone of the college entrance exam, that my grandparents had no choice but to send me to the city. When I first arrived at the new house, I liked it at first and didn't feel inferior. But over the years, I inevitably learned my grandma's shrewdness and frugality. This made my mom very unhappy. She repeatedly belittled me, suppressing me, comparing me with Alice. Alice loved dancing, and my parents saved money to enroll her in dance classes, and she managed to win some awards. When she stood there, she looked just like a swan, while I was the ugly duckling who couldn't even take the stage. In just 1 year, under the pressure from my parents and the comparisons with Alice, I became insecure and sensitive. But just when I thought it couldn't get worse, in my sophomore year, after the division of subjects, Alice and I ended up in the same class. Naturally, we sat together. From then on, my sky turned completely gray. In the past, I didn't understand things and would often be trapped. But now, I'm Hailey, who has lived for over a decade. The fault isn't mine. It never was. Alice noticed that I had been staring at her and looked at me haughtily. "What do you want?" I asked her. "Do you know Tony likes you?" Alice lifted her chin. "There are so many people who like me. What's so strange about it?" So, she knew. Tony is somewhat well known in school. There are 2 types of people everyone knows. One is the academically excellent. The other is the troublemaker. Tony belongs to the latter. When I had a crush on Tony, I secretly wrote his name in my notebook. Alice saw it. At that time, she asked me how I could like someone like Tony. Of course, I didn't tell her the reason, but she knew I liked Tony. Yet, when Tony confessed to her and failed and then got together with me, she didn't say a word, not even a reminder. Even after we got together, she was still flirty with Tony. What was she thinking back then? Watching a show, enjoying it secretly, taking pleasure in my misfortune? I slowly exhaled, suppressing my urge to question her. Alice seemed to remember something and said in a condescending tone, "Oh, I forgot you liked him." Her voice wasn't low, and the classmates around us heard it and turned to look. I calmly said, "You remember wrong. I don't like anyone. High school is so busy. Who has time to date? Unlike your art exam, we have that time to spare to solve more problems." Alice got angry. "Hailey, what do you mean?" I glanced out the window. The teacher is coming. Alice could only close her mouth in frustration and glared at me fiercely. After this class, it was noon. According to routine, Tony would come to our class, asking me to line up for him to get food while chatting with Alice, getting closer to her and giving her little gifts. As expected, as soon as the class bell rang, Tony was already leaning against our classroom door. After the teacher left, he strolled in with one hand in his pocket, moving lazily. He tapped my desk twice with his knuckles, half smiling. "Hailey, there's a new dish in the cafeteria. I heard it's delicious." Meaning he wanted me to bring him food. The cafeteria food is hard to grab. Usually, there are no meat dishes left, just soup. My taste is completely different from Tony's. Every time I help him line up and get his food, the dishes I like are basically gone. Moreover, I have to bring it back to him before I can go back to eat, and then I have to wash his dishes. I used to feel like I was losing my mind over such trivial things, falling for him so deeply. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became, so I didn't even glance at Tony. He looked a bit tense, but due to Alice being there, he didn't blow up. Instead, Alice took the initiative to say, "Hailey, bring me some food to the dorm. I have something to say to Tony now," with an air of superiority high above. Her gaze toward me was full of provocation. She wanted to use Tony to make me jealous and angry. I stood up, smiling coldly. "I'm not bringing it." After saying that, I walked past her, heading to the cafeteria. Just then, Tony called out to me, sounding somewhat lecturing. Hailey, as your brother, you should listen to your sister. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Do I have to bring food for everyone? I looked at Tony. Am I your mom? Then I glanced at Alice, or your mom. There were others in the classroom, and upon hearing this, they laughed out loud. Their faces suddenly turned ugly. I turned gracefully, leaving without a trace of worry. Tony wasn't giving up. While I was in the cafeteria, his little brother came to relay a message. Wang said he's waiting for you in the classroom and hopes you won't keep him waiting too long. There was a hint of threat in his tone. I ignored him completely. Who does Tony think he is? After enjoying delicious braised pork and ribs, I bought a chilled drink and happily went to the dorm for a nap. During the busy and stressful senior year, many people go to the classroom to self-study during lunch, reviewing problems with high mental tension. I used to do this too. But today, I just wanted to indulge myself. Let Tony wait if he wants. As soon as I arrived at the dorm, I found Alice was there. She and I were not in the same dorm. Seeing me, she looked me up and down. Where's my food? Sometimes I can't help but feel that many people are actually not mentally normal, but since they can manage their lives, they're considered normal. Alice seemed to just realize, you didn't bring me food? She suddenly stood up and yelled at me. Hailey, didn't you hear me ask you to bring food? You didn't bring me food. What am I supposed to eat now? You did this on purpose, didn't you? I shouted louder than her. I said I wouldn't bring it. Are you deaf or is your brain messed up? Are you mentally challenged? Can't you understand words? In school, Alice and I rarely interacted, even when we were desk mates. She was the school beauty, and I was the invisible one. Occasionally she would ask me to do something, and though I was unwilling, I would still grumble and complete it. Today, she was obviously angry and wanted to get back at me, but she didn't expect I would react differently. Alice was stunned for 2 seconds. You've gotten bold, daring to yell at me? Do you believe I will go back and tell mom and dad to teach you a lesson? I looked indifferent. Go ahead, big baby. You. Alice pointed at me, unable to say anything for a while. Just wait. She glared at me fiercely and slammed the door as she left. I could guess how she would exaggerate when she went home for the weekend. My parents would definitely side with her and then punish me. But I was no longer that Hailey who desperately wanted my parents' approval. I wouldn't endure it. When I went home on Friday, Alice exaggeratedly told my parents that I didn't bring her food. The moment I stepped in the door, a remote control flew toward me and hit my forehead. The sharp pain made me cry out. My mom pointed at me and scolded, you ungrateful wolf, no conscience. What's wrong with bringing your sister some food? She's your sister, how can you bear to let her starve all afternoon? I see you're jealous that your sister can dance, purposely letting her starve, trying to make her sick. At such a young age, you have a wicked heart. You shouldn't have been brought up here in the first place, simply heartless. My dad's face was also gloomy. You haven't been with us since you were little. Your personality has been spoiled. Starting today, your weekly allowance will be halved. When you know your mistake, it will be restored. Now, apologize to your sister. Alice looked at me triumphantly, waiting for me to apologize. I lowered my hand from my forehead. I'm not apologizing. You can beat me to death. As soon as I finished speaking, my mom rushed over and slapped me. Her arms swung wide, hitting me hard. I crashed into the nearby shoe cabinet but held back my tears. I had anticipated this before coming back. I knew how cruel they could be. Soon this house would be in chaos. While my mom continued scolding me, I ran back to my room and locked the door. Taking out my phone from under the pillow, I cried and video called my grandma. In the past, to please my mom, I had unilaterally cut off contact with my grandma. Grandma may have her flaws, but she raised me on her own. She cared for me the most. When the video connected, I immediately showed her the slap mark on my face and the bruise on my forehead. Grandma, save me. My parents want to kill me. I was crying uncontrollably. My grandma on the other end immediately put down her work and rushed over with my grandpa. Near, don't be afraid. Grandma is coming to support you. I'm still alive. How dare they bully my granddaughter? 4 hours later, my grandparents angrily knocked on the door. It was already dark. My parents and Alice were having dinner, all smiles and laughter. As for me, hiding in my room, I might as well not exist. My dad went to open the door, but before he could say a word, he got slapped by my grandpa. I sent Hailey up here to enjoy life, not to be mistreated by you. Such a small girl, and you dare to hit her. You really are unworthy of being parents. Grandma rushed towards my mom, clapping her hands, and sat down on the floor, wailing loudly, "Oh my Hailey, what a good child she is. And now she's been slapped, so her face is swollen. I raised this child with my own hands. Like a treasure, how could she be hit? When she's with you, we share the same mother. How can there be such a biased mom in this world?" My mom retorted, "Aren't you biased too? You treat Alice so well. Have you ever shown a good face to Hailey?" Grandma ignored her and continued wailing. The neighbors opened their doors, curiously peeking out. Seeing this, my dad covered his face, hurriedly going to shut the door. The living room was chaotic for a while, with Grandma crying, Mom cursing, no one giving in. Grandpa and Dad calmed down first, pulling their wives apart, trying to soothe them. The living room finally quieted down. At that moment, I opened the door and timidly stepped out. Grandma, Grandpa. As soon as Grandma saw me, she immediately hugged me tightly. Hailey, why didn't you tell Grandma? You were being wronged? It must be that mom of yours threatening you not to say anything, right? I've known for a long time. She's not a good person. Buying a house but not letting me and your grandpa come stay, and inciting you not to contact Grandma. My heart truly hurts. My mom wanted to refute, but Dad held her back. Grandpa waved his hand. Hailey is about to take her college entrance exams. Do you parents understand the importance of it? How about this? Your mom and I will stay here to prevent Hailey from being your punching bag. While we're not around, you don't welcome her. After the exams, we'll take her home. My mom's voice was sharp. You want to stay here? Grandma's voice was even louder. Can't I live in my son's house? Grandpa gave Dad a look. Dad could only nod. That night, Grandma slept with me in my room. She gently touched my face. Hailey, I know you don't like Grandma. You want your mom's approval, but you were raised by Grandma. How could I bear to let you be wronged? My nose felt sour, and I hugged Grandma. I like Grandma. In my previous life, my mom always favored Alice, catering to her every whim and belittling me everywhere. For a long time, I was very sensitive, anxious, and suffered from insomnia. Later, I slowly believed that my mom really didn't like me. By the time I wanted to reach out to Grandma, it was already too late. I'm sorry, Grandma. I shouldn't have stopped contacting you. She may have had a bad temperament, with many flaws, but her love for me was enough. With Grandpa and Grandma's arrival, this home fell into a strange state. My parents and Alice were all lovey-dovey, while Grandpa and Grandma fussed over me, almost as if they were trying to outdo each other. It felt strangely like we weren't even a family. I didn't understand why I had such a peculiar family. When returning to school on the weekend, Alice must have been warned, so she didn't say a word to me. I was more than happy with that. However, I didn't expect that right before evening study, Tony would appear and block me in the dimly lit path. He firmly blocked my way. His gaze fell on me, carrying some pressure. Hailey, I don't like people who don't listen. Right now, go apologize to Alice. I understood instantly. Alice must have gone to complain to him. I rolled my eyes. You like my sister, right? I'll help you chase her. Look, today she initiated conversation with you. Tony narrowed his eyes, looking a bit puzzled. What do you mean? I got straight to the point. My sister hates me. The more I provoke her, the more she wants to get back at me. She knows I like you, so she'll approach you, and I deliberately paused. Tony pressed, and then what? Then, you pretend to like me, and she'll naturally do everything she can to chase you. Tony seemed a bit tempted, but seeing me, he hesitated again. I knew he looked down on me. My sister is the school beauty. Many people like her, but how many can be pursued by her? Fine, Tony agreed decisively. I smiled a little. Let the fun games begin. The weekend evening study was relaxed, and Tony brazenly came to our class. The students who lived off campus didn't have to attend, so there were some empty seats, and Alice sat far away from me, but Tony sat in the empty seat behind me. I caught Alice's surprised gaze in my peripheral vision. Suddenly, Tony poked my back with his pen. I turned around, and he playfully handed me a blank note. He just wanted to grab Alice's attention with this. I cooperatively pretended to write a reply, then passed it to him. Alice clearly got angry, storming over to sit down, reaching out to snatch the note. I was quick to tuck the note into my pocket, bending down to focus on my problems, pretending not to see her. Meanwhile, Tony flirtatiously whistled at Alice from behind. Alice was both angry and embarrassed. After evening study ended, I deliberately took my time packing up, letting them leave first, then quietly followed behind. On the way back to the dorm, Alice blocked Tony, angrily questioning, "What note were you passing? Didn't you promise me that Hailey would apologize to me?" Tony crossed his arms. "Sorry, but I suddenly think Hailey is pretty cute, and she's always liked me, and obedient, so I want to try with her." Alice's voice was sharp. "You like her?" Tony nodded a bit. Alice looked at him in disbelief. "Weren't you supposed to like me?" Tony raised his eyebrows. "Did I ever say that?" The scene suddenly quieted down. I was at the back, enjoying the drama. In the end, Alice gritted her teeth. "You can't like Hailey." "Why not?" Tony pretended to be confused. "Because I like you. Dump Hailey and be with me." Without even looking, I knew Tony was thrilled. He pretended to hesitate. Hailey has done a lot to chase me. I'm quite touched. You. Alice was completely led along. Fine, I'll chase you too, just wait. Until Alice left. The smile at the corners of Tony's mouth never faded. It was clear he was overjoyed. I hope he stays this happy in the future. The next day, Alice began to get close to Tony. I didn't even need to give suggestions. Tony was already showing off. Every time Alice made a move, he would pretend to be affectionate with me while keeping her in suspense. When Alice got angry, he would coax her. This scene resembled their chat history back then. While they played their game, I buried myself in solving problems. In my past life, I graduated from a teacher training college and later became a high school teacher. So these knowledge points were easy for me, but just to be safe, I still needed to practice more. After all, this time, I didn't want to just be a high school teacher. Soon, rumors began to spread around the school that the school beauty was pursuing Tony. During a rare sunny physical education class, I was lying on the grass, sunbathing while reading, with the light behind me. At that moment, someone sat down behind me, chatting away. I told you, our Wangge is incredibly charming. Look, even the school beauty is starting to chase after him. Oh please, what school beauty? She can only dance a little and has won some awards. She's nowhere near worthy of Wangge. Tony's voice couldn't hide his bragging. All right, girls are sensitive, so let's not say that. Alice has been chasing me for quite a while. It's not good to keep her in suspense. Confessing is something a man should do. On the other side, the head teacher had already heard the rumors and called Alice to the office. Alice, although you're pursuing an arts exam, your cultural scores are also very important. Do you know that? Faced with the head teacher's stern expression, Alice's face turned pale. I understand, teacher. The head teacher didn't say anything too straightforward. After emphasizing the importance of the college entrance examination, he let Alice go. Meanwhile, I had already returned from the playground after hearing Tony bragging with his buddies. As soon as Alice came out, I pulled her aside. Seeing me, she immediately pushed my hand away in disgust. Hailey, did you report me? Don't think just because Grandma and Grandpa are here, you can act with impunity. This is my parents' house, and they can be kicked out anytime. You too, I replied. When they bought that house, my parents didn't have enough money, so they borrowed a lot from Grandma and Grandpa. Back then, Grandma and Grandpa had heard that Alice had a dance class, and they wanted to enroll me in a hobby class I liked too. They thought if Alice had something, I should have it too. Even though the rural area was far from hobby classes, making it difficult to drop me off. Because of that house, they didn't have any extra money to enroll me in a hobby class. The house deed does indeed have my parents' names, but half of the house payment comes from Grandma and Grandpa, so my parents have no right to kick either of them or me out, unless they want to be criticized behind their backs. I pulled you over to tell you that we've both been fooled by Tony. Alice was taken aback. What do you mean? Tony told me he liked you, but gave me a chance to pursue him. He also told you he liked me, wanting you to chase him. He's deceiving both of us, trying to play both sides. Alice had a high opinion of herself and couldn't accept being deceived or played with. Unfortunately, she was foolish without realizing it. I just heard he plans to confess to you in a couple of days. After saying that, I turned to leave. I didn't even need to give suggestions. Alice was the best at hitting people where it hurts. Back when I first came to the city, I couldn't hold my head up in front of her. At that time, I didn't understand why she had such animosity towards me, even though we were blood relatives. Gradually, I figured it out because my parents didn't like me. She followed suit. But now, it didn't matter, because I didn't like them anymore either. Soon, the time arrived at the point I remembered. My birthday. Also Alice's birthday. The wind was strong that day, and the teachers went to a meeting. Tony prepared flowers, balloons, and gifts, ready to confess to Alice at the girls' dormitory. He had someone call Alice down. Alice saw Tony from the dormitory balcony but didn't come down for a long time. She sent someone down to say, Alice is angry. She said she was called to the office alone last time, and she feels you have no responsibility. Please tell her that I didn't know she was called to the office at that time. I was. Tony didn't finish his sentence, and that person turned to leave. To show his responsibility, he stood downstairs for an hour. There were many onlookers around. Tony shouted Alice's name loudly like a male lead from a novel, reciting the confession he had prepared. Alice, the moment I saw you, I was already enchanted, but when it came to deep feelings, I hesitated. I hid in the crowd, listening to him finish this heartfelt confession. The students around spontaneously applauded, cheering him on, urging Alice to come down quickly. Finally, Alice came down slowly, with an arrogant expression. Tony, you really overestimate yourself. I was just pretending to play with you. How could you take it seriously? With someone like you, I wouldn't even want for free. Your grades are poor, and your character is terrible. No wonder your parents divorced and didn't want you. If I had a son like you, I might as well be dead." That last sentence pierced right through Tony's heart. The crowd fell silent in an instant. Tony's face went rigid, and his expression turned terrifying. "Alice, say that again." Alice coldly snorted. "I said, your parents are divorced. You're a kid without a father or mother." Before Alice could finish, Tony angrily threw the flowers in her face. "Alice." He was furious and was about to rush forward when others pulled him back. Calm down, calm down." Tony was most sensitive about others mentioning his parents. At that moment, he looked like he wanted to tear Alice into pieces. I suddenly realized he didn't seem to like Alice that much after all. Perhaps the unattainable is the best. In the end, Tony was forcibly dragged away. Alice was also startled and hurried back to the dormitory. On the ground, the slightly wilted bouquet of flowers remained, just like the bouquet he had given me in my past life. In my past life, Tony came to confess to me in the afternoon, but today, he didn't come to find me. Instead, he was criticized for his bad influence. I thought Tony probably wouldn't come looking for me anymore. What a pity. I wanted to kick him when he was down. Today is both Alice's and my birthday. In the evening, we asked the teacher for leave from evening study and went home to celebrate. This time was different from before. On the table, there were not only the strawberry cake that Alice liked, but also the mango cake I loved. Because Alice is allergic to mangoes, eating them would cause blisters around her lips. So our family had always forbidden mangoes from being in the house. Even though I loved eating mangoes, and even though Alice had grown up and could control her cravings, the family still wouldn't allow it. In front of the mango cake were my grandparents, smiling with crinkled faces. My mom's expression wasn't good, but she didn't say anything. Only when she saw Alice did she beam with joy. "Alice, come here. After today, you'll be an adult." This time, we couldn't ask for leave, so your coming-of-age ceremony can't be held for now. After your college entrance examination, we'll definitely throw you a grand coming-of-age ceremony. Alice affectionately sat between her parents, hugging them and acting spoiled. "Thank you, Mom and Dad." Seeing this, Grandma came over to pull me aside. "We should also have a coming-of-age ceremony and hold it at the biggest hotel." I smiled at Grandma. "Okay, thank you, Grandma." At a single dining table, 2 cakes, and 6 people. This should have been the closest family, yet they split into 2 factions, each occupying one side. When it came time to make wishes, I hesitated to blow out the candles. Grandma cautiously asked me what was wrong. I looked at my parents and Alice across the table, asking for the last time the question that lingered in my heart. "Dad, Mom, Sis, why do you dislike me so much? Since it's my birthday today, can you please tell me?" These were the words I hadn't asked in my past life. They were also what I had always known, but wanted to hear from them directly. My mom snorted first, and just as she was about to speak harshly, my dad coughed and interrupted her. "Hailey, we don't dislike you. It's just that you weren't with us when you were little. In the future, your mom and I will definitely try our best to make up for it." My mom pouted. "You've always been easy to take care of, unlike your sister, who's always uncomfortable and cries. I inevitably put more thought into your sister. Now that you're grown up, just get along with your sister, and you'll both have what each other has." Alice honestly spoke up. "I always thought I was the only daughter. I didn't know we were twins." Suddenly, a younger sister appears to take away our parents' affection. Who can stand that? I looked at them and smiled bitterly. They were avoiding the question, or rather, avoiding the wrong decision they made back then. I closed my eyes and made my wish. My wish is that I never want to see Dad, Mom, and Sis again. I opened my eyes and blew out the candles. When my parents heard this, their expressions changed immediately. "Hailey, what do you mean? Have we spoiled you too much during this time? If it weren't for your grandma stopping me, wouldn't I have taken you with me? If you're going to blame someone, blame your grandma. It has nothing to do with me." My dad also angrily rebuked. "I thought you were too young to say this. But how could you wish for something so cruel? I really regret not teaching you properly when you were little." Alice pursed her lips, remaining silent. Grandma wanted to speak for me but was held back by me. I looked at them. "I wish you 3 could live happily together. Since the original decision was wrong, then let it continue to be wrong. The deep-seated prejudices in human nature are unchangeable. Since I had to go back to school tomorrow, after celebrating my birthday, Alice and I still had to return. On the way back, Grandma hesitated to speak several times. As I approached the school gate, she finally called out to me, her eyes cloudy. Hailey, Grandma was wrong for insisting on having you with me back then. It's wrong for a person not to have a mom and dad. I went back and hugged her, choking back tears. Having Grandpa and Grandma is enough. In my past life, I also thought that not having a mom and dad wouldn't work. But in the end, the more I wanted something, the less I ended up with it. Rather than stubbornly pursuing what doesn't belong to me, it's better to let go. Even though Grandma was 1,000 times wrong back then, in my eyes, she loved me enough. To me, loving me is enough. After returning to school, Alice and I felt even more like strangers. Plus, she had to prepare for the joint examination, busy with practice and had no time to pay attention to me. I was still buried in solving problems, when unexpectedly, Tony appeared again, and this time, he brought a bouquet of exquisite fresh flowers. It had only been a week since he confessed to Alice and failed. At first, everyone treated him as a topic for conversation after meals, but everyone was busy studying and solving problems, and after a few days, they became too lazy to mention it. According to Tony's usual character, he would have exploded long ago, teaching a lesson to those who mocked him, but this time, he actually endured for a week. What a rarity. Tony blocked my way behind the dormitory on a small path. This time he was smarter, not in the crowd. He stopped me but hesitated to speak. So I asked, "Is there something wrong?" As soon as I spoke, Tony's eyes turned red, almost as if he were about to cry. I quickly took 2 steps back. Something was off about him. Tony slowly opened his mouth. "Classmate Hailey, after all these years of getting to know you, I have fallen. But when it comes to deep feelings, I am cowardly." This time, his confession was different. But it didn't matter. The opportunity to kick him when he was down finally came. So, I patiently waited for Tony to finish speaking. When he looked at me with expectation, I coldly replied, "You, not even dogs would talk to you." Tony's eyes widened in shock, as if he hadn't expected this reaction from me. Good. I felt satisfied. I turned to leave. But then Tony called out, "Hailey." That familiar Hailey from his mouth carried an indescribable emotion. In that instant, I knew Tony was like me. He had been reborn. The nickname Yak was only something he started calling me after we got married. Once, I ran into Alice and her husband, and I heard her husband call her Yak. At that time, I didn't think much of it because both our names had A and I. But now I realize it was because Tony saw me as a substitute for Alice. How disgusting. My expression turned cold. Tony stopped me again. "Hailey, listen to me explain. Alice and I had nothing. Once she deleted me, we were already done. What about before she deleted you? We were together in senior year, and his phone was locked in college. What about those 2 years in between?" Tony just weakly replied, "Between me and her, there was nothing. You have to believe me, I love you. Otherwise, how could I marry you?" I sneered, "Then why did she get divorced? What are you getting drunk about?" "Tony, stop deceiving yourself. And don't come to disgust me." Tony still wouldn't give up. "Hailey, I know you're just angry. You love me so much. How could you bear to abandon me? Look, obviously, I'm not doing well academically, and my family background is ordinary, but you've secretly had a crush on me for years. How could you not love me anymore?" Seeing his confidence, I couldn't help but laugh in anger. "Do you know why I had a crush on you?" He looked at me. "Because I mistook you for someone else. In my first year of high school, when I had just moved to the city, I took the wrong bus and got lost. At that time, I had no phone, didn't remember my parents' numbers, and had no change. I waited at the terminal, hoping a kind driver would take me home, but the terminal was too remote, with an hour between each bus. The sky gradually darkened. I began to feel scared and started crying. At that moment, a boy wearing a hat and mask approached, coughing as he asked, "Classmate, do you need help?" He wore the same school uniform as I did. I felt as if I had seen a lifeline, crying uncontrollably while explaining the situation. He had a cold but still comforted me with a hoarse voice. Then he called a taxi for me and paid for it, with his hat and mask. I didn't know what he looked like, but I remembered his Stitch wallet. Later, I saw Tony pay with that wallet, and his height and build were very similar. I assumed it was him, so I kept an eye on him. Gradually, I began to like him. After getting together with Tony, I discovered by chance during a conversation that he wasn't that person, but by that time, I liked him. So I went along with the mistake. Tony, upon hearing this, couldn't believe it. A wallet, because of a wallet? That kind of wallet sells hundreds of them in a store every day. You'd mistake someone just because of a wallet. I interrupted him. It's not the wallet, it's that person. It's a pity that I don't know his name, nor do I know what he looks like. Tony, if I hadn't mistaken you for him, I wouldn't have paid attention to you, let alone liked you. Tony stared at me intently, and after a long while, he finally spoke. Are you trying to say that your affection was stolen from me? I thought for a moment and shook my head. Not really. Because you didn't know I mistook you for someone else. But this time, I won't like you again. You're not worth it. Not worth it at all. My love is timid yet fervent. His love is hypocritical and beneath contempt. After I left, Tony stood there alone for a long time. In the end, he bitterly smiled, tears rolling down his cheeks. The college entrance examination soon approached. I performed quite well, feeling I could get into a top-tier university. Alice, however, during her school entrance exam, due to carelessness, had her USB drive damaged by other art examinees. In the end, her results were not ideal, and she could only return to the college entrance examination. But she had fallen too far behind in the knowledge points, making it difficult to catch up. On the day the college entrance examination ended, she locked herself in her room. Meanwhile, I was preparing to go back to the countryside with my grandparents. At that moment, my mom began to persuade me to stay. Hailey, I was wrong before. I shouldn't have treated you that way. We're all family. How can we not be together? My dad chimed in when we bought this house. We specifically chose it for the 3 bedrooms. One for you and one for Alice. I found it somewhat funny. How is it that when I no longer needed certain things, they suddenly wanted to come close? I'll say it again. I wish you 3 could live happily together. I turned around and followed my grandparents out. At first, they tried to persuade me to go back. Later, seeing me indifferent, they stopped. As the school year was about to start, I heard my parents wanted Alice to repeat the year, but she chose to go to a junior college. My parents were very disappointed in her, and once threatened not to acknowledge her if she didn't repeat. Alice replied to them, "Is it like how you didn't want to recognize Hailey back then?" They fell silent immediately. When it was time to register for college, I sent my luggage to school first, setting off easily, but unexpectedly, everyone had the same idea. In the end, from the school gate to the dormitory, the entire road was filled with luggage. As I was wondering how to find mine, a warm voice came from behind. "Dear classmate, do you need help?" The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.